Right, so what we're going to do then is move on from a film where not a lot happens and it's very, very calm and visually quiet to a film that is not that.
Yes, this is Prisoners of the Ghostland, and just last month we were discussing a rather more low-key than usual Nick Cage outing in The Pig, and I suppose the universe had to find an urgent way of returning to equilibrium, and I fear it may have rather overbalanced, as most of Prisoners of the Ghostland is altogether too wackadoodle to explain, or indeed comprehend.
Not equilibrium, Scott, tending towards entropy.
Here, Nick Cage is our anti-hero named Checks Notes Hero, a grizzled, all-action criminal incarcerated in the stockades after a bank job goes wrong, after his erstwhile partner goes gun crazy and starts shooting up the place, including the children. Won't someone please think of the children? Well, it turns out that Hero does. His guilty imaginings of the kid along the path to redemption being the closest I can come to extracting any kind of meaning from this. Yes, redemption, which comes in the shape of the local evil tyrant governor, Bill Moseley, who wants Hero released to track down his adopted daughter, Sophia Botella's Bernice, who had run off into the Ghostlands from the relative straitjacket-esque safety of Checks Notes Samurai Town, ruled by the governor and his goons with an iron fist clenching a katana. So Hero's given a deadline and an exploding leather jumpsuit to enforce said deadline, and is sent off into the wilds of the presumably post-apocalyptic wastelands of wherever this is meant to be set, either Japan or the Wild West. I don't know, and I'm not sure it knows either. Quite what transpires after this is, well, I'd argue not coherent enough to warrant much further scrutiny. Something about Hero being the prophesied one to free a local settlement from some sort of curse, although, of course, ultimately, it's all coming back to Hero taking on the governor's goons. It's all a mess of possibly supernatural, maybe just delirious fever dreams that Cage goes through in that typical Cage fashion, although for once, his performance is out-crazied by the rest of the visuals and narrative, which is a particularly inchoate blend of Mad Max, Yojimbo, or given the setting, maybe Last Man Standing, Blade Runner, and whatever else was lying around. And for me at least, it never really coagulates into anything either interesting or coherent. And I've settled for one or the other, but having neither is a bit of a problem. I've been tangentially aware that director Sion Sono has been making this kind of outre fare for the past few decades, and while I've had a few of his films on my ever-expanding list of films to get round to, like Suicide Club and Tokyo Tribe, this is my first experience of his work, and it is not at all positive. Well, okay, there's a few visually arresting scenes here, and some of the action is over the top enough to be mildly interesting, but that's about it. Look, I'm not going to roast this film, because I'm quite glad that it exists, and that there are still people making work at the outer limits of what's deemed commercially acceptable. And I'm sure there will be some people who will get a great deal out of this, even if it's self-evidently not going to find mainstream acceptance. It's just that, well, the thing is, I'm normally exactly the sort of person who will like this deliberately weird, hyper-stylized, fugue state narrative thing, like all them Takashi Miike films, what I unloved many a year ago. And if this is not my cup of tea, I'm left wondering whose thirst this drink is supposed to quench. My advice, watch the charmingly batty trailer and just imagine a better film.
I feel like you've been reading my mind quite a lot, Scott, because like, some of these things you've said are identical to notes I've made myself. And I too long for the long ago before times of this slot in August when we talked about The Wonderful Pig and how nice it was to see that Nick Cage again. Yeah. That didn't last long. And this is set in a samurai Wild West town that's also in a post-apocalyptic wasteland with zombies, yet it has Volvos and Toyotas and contemporary mobile phones. What is this film? It certainly looks good at points, right? It's often quite stylish, and that's pretty much the single positive thing I have to say about the film. Mm-hmm. It has no characters, it has no plot, it has no point. I think there's a lot of imagery, symbolism and allegory in there, but I don't care enough about any of it to try and parse it. And I could be wrong. It reads as all surface, no feeling, and it may indeed be all surface, no feeling. Certainly, I'd have to not have been very bored by it to even try, and that very much was not the case. And there's weird mechanical problems with it too. Like, particularly, it's got this very large cast of Japanese actors speaking very heavily accented English, making comprehension difficult to say the least.
Yeah.
Well, and it's certainly a Nick Cage film. All of the dialogue is either whispered or shouted, and everything on the film is on fire. But it's just such a mishmash of genres and influences. I mean, it even references Jesus Christ Superstar at one point and has no identity of its own. Nick Cage is Jesus Max Pliskin in a world created by Terry Gilliam. And while I'll grant that sounds amazing, it's just a boring mess. Wouldn't avoid watch Pig again.
I got bored of Takashi Miike while Takashi Miike was still Takashi Miike. Never mind before Shion Soro was being Takashi Miike. I like the way this film is shot. I like the way this film is lit. I'm really shallow, so I always like the way Sophia Boutella looks. And I really like the way Bill Moseley mispronounces the word testicles. Avoid. I don't know what this is supposed to be. The era of sort of the era of acknowledging that, man, there are some like far out Japanese filmmakers out there, isn't there? Ended conservatively 20 years ago, I think. Thereabouts, or certainly reached its apex. I think I don't know what I was going to say. Scott, like you, I'm not necessarily angry that this film exists. I just don't really know that I care one way or the other about it. It kind of is there. It's Nick Cage doing that Nick Cage thing. And Drew, I don't know. I'm reading from your comments that perhaps you're down on Nick Cage and stuff. I think that of all the things that can be said about Nick Cage's career, Nick Cage as an actor, I don't know that I've seen him. Well, I've not seen him a lot recently because I tend to avoid his movies. But when I do sort of come across him, I don't know that I can ever accuse him of phoning stuff in. I still think he makes an effort, which is more than you can say for a lot of his contemporaries, like, you know, the Bruce Willises of the world, how those mighty have fallen. But this film seems engineered to be a meme factory or something, except none of the memes that it hopes to present are actually all that interesting. And I've read a few reviews of the film leading into that where people are saying, oh, there are some instantly iconic moments in this film. No, there aren't. It feels a bit like crazy off-kilter Japanese random movies made to order, and I'm 42, I'm past that now. It's okay. I don't regret having watched it. There were a couple of bits where I chuckled, but yeah, it's a thing that exists, and I don't grudge it its existence.
It's no Mandy, is it?
No.
Well, I didn't see Mandy yet, but do I prefer this to Colour Out of Space? Maybe.
Well, I was going to mention Mandy because you're saying like that I'm quite down. The reason I'm down this, I just thought the film was actively bad. But the reason I'm down it is because having just seen Peg a couple of months ago, I'm reminded of like that Nicolas Cage can do other types of acting. I don't disagree that he's given it his all a lot of the time. It's like I'm just not entirely sure that I'm on board with what all he's giving and the ends to which he's giving it. But
maybe feels like he's allowing people to exploit him, really.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, it does seem like because he has basically become a human meme. And whereas in Peg was such a subtle performance and a much, much better film, but the performance was central to it, and it's just like Nick Cage, the subtle actor with, you know, nuance and levels, and not just, you know, shouting and whispering and everything on fire. And I have really enjoyed some of his more, let's say, over-the-top roles, because as Scott mentioned, Mandy's great. It is one of those weird films that is both the best of things and the worst of things at the same time, and I still haven't decided which it is. And then, like, it's more just kind of throwaway stuff, but like Mom and Dad, that's really fun. And his kind of swivel-eyed scenery tune turn on that is perfect. It fits really well. Whereas here it feels like, oh, well, that's what Nicolas Cage is. We'll get him for that, and then we'll have visuals to match, and it's all just a mess.
This feels really quite cynically made to measure, I think.
It does a bit. And it can, and also it's just so derivative because, like, there's, apart from like, there's some really interestingly lit scenes, as you say, Craig, and there's some of the things that look nice. I don't even actually know why Sophia Boutelle's in the film, though she has nothing to do.
No, it's actually criminal, the fact that, But, you've got things like
are they called rat men or something like that? They've got these kind of, it's almost like barbed wire shoulder guards. But
the crazy sort of mechanic guys who he tasked with getting the cars back in order.
Yeah, and so they're sort of like interesting, but I look at that and still think, yeah, that just kind of looks like a take on something from Mad Max.
Yeah.
Nothing in it feels original, all feels derivative.
Yes.
It does. I'm not even sure. I don't know what I took away from this. I'm not even convinced that I don't think it's supposed to be some sort of like purgatory analogy or something like that. But again, even if it were, how tired is that by now? Yeah, I don't know. I kind of liked it in spite of itself, but I'm never going to watch this again.
Yeah. As I say, if there had been some sort of character, I might have been more on board, but there's no character. Nicolas Cage is obviously set up to be like a Snake Plissken, but like with no motivation and no character at all. It was like what was great about Snake Plissken. And again, I'm not saying that by accident, because that feels derivative, because there are elements of Escape from New York in there. Like, Snake Plissken didn't give a crap about anything. Nicolas Cage doesn't even have enough of a character to not give a crap about anything. And then the governor guy, it's like, I guess they're trying some sort of lazy... We're coming from a Japanese director who would be less familiar with it, but it feels like there's just a cheap and lazy shorthand there. It's like, well, he's dressed like a southern US plantation owner and therefore slave owner, and like with that southern drawl, well, obviously he's a bad guy.
He's basically dressed like the Colonel Sanders.
Yeah, but it just doesn't work because like there's nothing there. It's like he's the governor, and presumably he's holding all these women hostage, but it's not actually that clear. Later on, something happens that makes it, well, was he? But he's barely in the film for most of it, and it's like, so you have a villain who's not actually in the film at all. I can't care about anything in it. That's the problem. I've got no stakes here.
A villain who's hardly in the film. That sounds like foreshadowing to me, Drew.
Yeah, with about as much charisma as well. So yeah, but we're getting ahead of ourselves, Craig.
Before that